Hey y'all, so today we're doing 6.3 properties of trigonometric functions. So we're just going back and looking at our unit circle some more. So the first property is that sine, cosine, cosecant, secant, every time you add 2 pi, you will get the same value every time. And then for tangent and cotangent, every time you add pi, you'll get the same value. And that's called their period. So when we're finding the exact value of sine 17 pi over 4, I think your notes might only have a 7 there. So add a 17 and it should be 17 pi over 4. When trying to find this, 17 pi over 4 isn't on our unit circle. So we need to subtract 2 pi because this is the sine function and our period is 2 pi. To get back to a value and then try and get between 0 and 2 pi, which is our unit circle. So we're going to subtract 2 pi because this will give us the same value and we're trying to get on to a unit circle value. So 2 pi, and we'll say over 1, so we have a fraction and we need a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply the top and bottom by 4. So 17 pi over 4 minus 4 times 2 is 8 pi over 4. This equals 9 pi over 4, which is still bigger than between 0 and 2 pi. So we need to subtract another 8 pi over 4. So 9 pi over 4 minus 8 pi over 4, and that equals pi over 4. So here we can see that sine 17 pi over 4, sine of 9 pi over 4, and sine of pi over 4, those all would give you the same value. But pi over 4 is on our unit circle, so we can just look at that and find our answer. So the sine of pi over 4 is root 2 over 2. Okay, so now cosine 5 pi, again, we're going to subtract 2 pi because 5 pi is bigger than between 0 and 2 pi. So 5 pi minus 2 pi gives us 3 pi. That's still bigger, so 3 pi minus 2 pi again gives us pi. Now the cosine of pi, we look at that on our unit circle, and the cosine of pi is -1. Lastly, we have the tangent of 5 pi over 4, and now the period of tangent is only pi. So we're only going to subtract pi from here. So 5 pi over 4 minus pi over 1, get our common denominator by multiplying by 4 on the top and bottom. So 5 pi over 4 minus 4 pi over 4 equals pi over 4. So now we find the tangent of pi over 4 because that's on our unit circle, and we know that this equals 1. All right. Next, if we're given some information and we're trying to figure out where theta lies. So the first thing is that sine is greater than 0. And if we remember, sine theta equals y. So y is less than 0. Next we have cosine is less than 0. And if we think, okay, so cosine theta is our x value, and x is less than 0. So where on a coordinate plane is both y and x values less than 0? So here's where y values are less than 0. So we'll do y values are less than 0 in the purple. And then for x is less than 0, we'll do in the pink. So our double shaded area is in quadrant 3. So theta lies in quad 3. Next, we just have some more identities, and these are reciprocal identities. We went over these a little bit previously, but secant is 1 over cosine, cosecant is 1 over sine, cotangent 1 over tangent. Those are our reciprocal identities. And then our quotient identities is tangent equals sine over cosine, and cotangent is cosine over sine. So those are just identities that we want to remember. So we're going to use those, and we're given what sine equals and what cosine equals, and we're finding the exact values of the 4 remaining trig functions. So I'm going to start by finding tangent, and tangent is sine over cosine. And we know what sine and cosine equal. So I'm going to say tangent equals sine over cosine. Then I'm going to plug in what those equal from the problem, what they gave us. So sine is square root 5 over 5, and then divided by cosine, which is 2 root 5 over 5. We have 2 fractions divided by each other, so we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. So square root 5 over 5 times 5 over 2 square root 5. Here, those 5 cancels, those square root 5s cancel, so I'm left with 1/2. So tangent equals 1/2. And then we have cosecant, which is 1 over sine. So I'm going to say 1 over what sine equals. That is square root 5 over 5. Again, we're going to multiply by a reciprocal. So 1 over 1, just to give us a fraction and help us, times 5 over square root 5. This gives us 5 over square root 5. Can't have that square root in the denominator, so I'm going to multiply the top and bottom by square root 5. This gives me 5 square root 5 over 5. Now my 5's cancel. So the cosecant is square root 5. Okay, next we have cotangent, which equals, we could do it either using cosine over sine or 1 over tangent. And we already know what tangent is. It's 1/2, and that's going to be easier than using a radical for dividing 2 radicals by each other. So we have cotangent equals 1 over tan, and then we know that tangent equals 1/2. If we multiply by a reciprocal, we get cotangent equals 2. Now looking at secant, secant is 1 over cosine. So we have 1 over 2 square root 5 over 5. We're going to multiply by that reciprocal. So 2 square root 5. We end up with 5 over 2 square root 5. Can't have that radical in the bottom, so multiply by 5. Then we'll end up with 5 square root 5 over 10. And then we'll simplify the 5 over 10. And so the secant is square root 5 over 2. And if you want to make it, just highlight our answers here just to make it stand out a little bit more. All right, next we are given that sine equals 1/3 and the cosine is less than 0. So our cosine is negative and our sine is 1/3, which is positive. So where is cosine negative and sine positive? And that's in quadrant 2. And we're trying to find the remaining trig functions. So now we're going to draw a triangle knowing that we're in quadrant 2. So here is our triangle, theta, because this would be quadrant 2. That's how our triangle looks in quadrant 2. And then we already know sine equals 1/3. So I'm going to say the opposite over the hypotenuse. And now I got to find that missing side. And to find that missing side, I'm going to use Pythagorean theorem. So x squared plus 1 squared equals 3 squared. X squared plus 1 equals 9. X squared equals 8. Take the square root of that. And x equals 2 root 2. And then, since we are in quadrant 2, and we know cosine's negative, we're going to label that missing side as negative 2 square root 2. Alright, now we have our triangle filled out, and we can go use SOHCAHTOA to figure out the rest of the missing pieces. So for tangent, tangent is opposite over adjacent. So for tan theta, the opposite is 1. And the adjacent is negative 2 square root 2. Again, can't have the radical on the bottom, so I'm going to multiply the top and bottom by the radical. And I'll get that this equals negative square root 2 over 4. And then we can't simplify it, so that's what tangent equals. Now I'm going to go use my other identities and properties to find cosecant, secant, and cotangent. So cosecant is 1 over sine, and then we know that sine equals 1/3 because that's what we were given in the problem. So 1 over sine would be 1 over 1/3. If we multiply it by the reciprocal, we get that cosecant equals 3. Now to find cosine. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So the adjacent is negative 2 root 2, and then the hypotenuse is 3. We're going to use that to find the secant of theta. These all should have a theta. So the secant of theta is 1 over cosine. And so this is 1 over negative 2 root 2 over 3. Multiply by our reciprocal, so we get 3 over negative 2 root 2. Then we're going to multiply by that radical and end up with 3 square root 2 over negative 4. And then lastly, cotangent, which is 1 over tan. 1 over tan theta, which is 1 over negative square root 2 over 4, which equals 4 over square root 2 negative, and then multiply by that radical on the top and bottom. So we would get 4 square root 2 over 2 negative, which equals negative 2 square root 2. So those are our values for the remaining trig functions. Alright, the last thing on these notes are going over even and odd properties. So the odd functions are sine, cosecant, tangent, and cotangent. And what the odd property function means is just that if we have sine times a negative angle, it's just a negative times sine of the angle. So you can just put the negative out in front for those 4 different trig functions. Even functions is cosine and secant. And that means if we have cosine of a negative angle, it's just cosine of that angle. Just becomes positive. So looking at our examples, we'll start with sine of negative 45. And our property shows us that if that angle can come, that negative can come out front. So it's really negative times sine of 45. And the sine of 45 is square root 2 over 2. And then it's negative because that negative in front. So negative square root 2 over 2. Next, the cosine of negative pi using that even property. So this one's even. The first one was odd. So using that even property, for even, it just becomes positive. So it just becomes cosine of pi. And the cosine of pi equals -1. Cotangent is odd. So this becomes negative cotangent 3 pi over 2. The cotangent of 3 pi over 2 is 0. And then times the negative, it's just negative. It's just 0. So this equals 0. Okay. Then we have the tangent of negative 37 pi over 4. And this is an odd function, but also 37 pi over 4 doesn't fit in our unit circle. So we need to subtract. Remember, tangent has a period of pi, so we need to keep subtracting pi until we get into our between 0 and 2 pi. So let's just start with saying how this would end up equaling negative tan 37 pi over 4. But we're going to take 37 pi over 4 and start subtracting pi. And we are going to change this to have a common denominator. So it's 37 pi over 4 minus 4 pi over 4. This gives us 33 pi over 4, subtract pi over 4 again. So 33 pi over 4 minus 4 pi over 4 minus 4 equals 29 pi over 4. Again, that gives us 25. 25 pi over 4 minus 4 pi over 4 equals 21. 21 pi over 4. So we're keep subtracting the 4 pi over 4. It's going to take us a little bit to get there. So 17 pi over 4 minus 4 pi 4 equals 13 pi over 4. 13 pi over 4. We're getting closer. Equals 9 pi over 4. 9 pi over 4 minus 4 pi over 4. We get 5 pi over 4. And then 5 pi over 4 minus 4 pi over 4. We end up getting pi over 4, which is on our unit circle. So let's go back up. And so we have the negative tangent of pi over 4. Tangent pi over 4 is 1. And then we have that negative. So this equals -1. All right, if you have any questions,